Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the new mask features in Adobe Camera Raw. Last year, I did a comprehensive tutorial on Adobe Camera Raw, which you can check out here. And quite a few of you have asked me to do an update on the new mask features in Adobe Camera Raw. So in this tutorial, we're going to take two images, we're going to run through an edit on both of them, and we're going to heavily focus on the new mask features. I'm going to show you all the new masks that are available in Camera Raw, how you can use them, intersect them, work with them to get the effects that you want. Now, if you want to follow along, I have included the two Camera Raw files that I use in a link in the description of this video. So go ahead, download those, and then let's dive into Photoshop. Okay, so the first file I'm going to open is the Hillcrest Park 405. It's going to open it in Camera Raw. And before we dive into the masks, I want to make some basic corrections. You can see just here on our histogram and also just looking at the image that it's a little bit too dark. So let's open up the basic panel here and we're going to adjust the exposure. I'm going to just move this to the right until our image looks pretty good, and I think right around there is good. I might also just take down the highlights a little bit and get a little more detail in here. Maybe just bring up the shadows a tiny bit. So generally bringing down the highlights, bringing up the shadows is going to increase your dynamic range, meaning the range of luminance that the image is capturing. So it's going to bring more detail into your shadows and it's going to bring more detail into your highlights. You don't want to overdo that because you start to get that kind of strange HDR look, but a little bit on most images is going to work just fine. The other thing on this is it does feel a little bit cool. So I'm just going to up the temperature to about there where I think the skin tones look really nice. So those are all the changes that I'm going to make in the basic panel. Next, we're going to go into masks and realize in your editing panel of Camera Raw, and this also applies to Lightroom, all your basic panels are happening at kind of like the bottom layer. If you think of it as a layer stack, your basic panel is happening at the very bottom. On top of that, you have your corrections and your masks, which target specific parts of an image. And then layered on top of that is all these other settings that you can make. So workflow-wise, make your basic settings first, then dive into corrections and masks. And then once you're done with those two, dive back into curve, detail, and all these others. Obviously, crop is also one of these things that you're probably going to want to do pretty early. But this image is cropped pretty well, so we're going to leave the crop as it is and dive straight into our masks. Now, Adobe has redone the entire mask panel for Camera Raw. So first things first, you'll notice that rather than the four that previously existed, or the three, I should say, that previously existed, which was the brush linear gradient and radial gradient, we now have these two new additional auto masks, select subject and select sky. Both of them use Adobe's AI to figure out what is the sky or what is the subject of your photo. Now, obviously, select subject works best with people and portraits, and select sky only works if you have a sky in your image. In our case, we do have a very clearly defined subject, so we're going to be using select subject. Brush works just as it did before. Same with linear gradient, radial gradient. Now, color range and luminance range kind of existed as subsets to the other masks in the past, where you could make a radial gradient, linear gradient, or a brush, and then manipulate what color range or what luminance range those masks affected. Well, now you can actually create these in and of themselves. And you actually also have depth mask. Now, a depth mask only works if the information was captured in your camera. So photos taken with an iPhone or other cameras that support depth information, you'll have that depth range. But for an image like this, you're obviously not going to have it. Now you can see here the shortcuts that exist for these various ones. Now these are great as you're working. If you want to add a linear gradient, you can just hit G. If you want to add a radial gradient, it's J. And for brushing, it's K. And then for a color range, it's Shift C, Shift L. These do not have shortcuts yet. I'm sure at some point we will get shortcuts for those. But first things first, let's go ahead and see what happens when we click on Select Subject. You'll notice we have this new panel that did not exist in previous versions of Camera Raw. This is kind of a layers palette for your masks. Each mask represents a correction, right? So if this mask is going to be my background fog, I can now start manipulating this mask so that I affect just this background area. So first thing I want to do is invert this. The shortcut for invert, if you click here, is Option X. So we're going to do Option X. That's going to invert our background. Now you'll notice that there's this red overlay representing what part of the image my settings are going to adjust, meaning what part is the mask selecting. You can turn this on or off with this click. You can also hit Y to turn it on or off. You can also go here and change the color of your overlay. So depending on what your image is, if you need a color that works better, you can change that there. You can also change the brightness and the opacity of it here. So your brightness, your opacity. You can also determine whether it color indicates the affected area or the unaffected area. So let's say I wanted the color to indicate the unaffected area, and I'm just going to show in red the parts that are not in my selection. So let's do that, hit OK. Next thing is I don't want any of this bottom in my selection. So I'm going to go to Subtract and do a linear gradient. And you'll notice that the intersecting or the minusing is an Option G. And here under Add, it's Shift G. Okay. So for a subtracting linear gradient, we're going to do Option G and just make that gradient come up to about there. And you can see now that's no longer part of our selection. Next thing I want to do is I want to intersect this with a radial gradient. So to do that, I'm going to go here and then go intersect with radial gradient. And now as I start making my radial gradient, you can see everything that's outside of that radial gradient is not being selected. But because I'm intersecting, it's taking account what I already have selected out. So that's the area that I want to make my corrections in. Now that I have my mask fully built up here, I'm going to go down here and start changing the settings. And notice when I start making the setting changes here, that overlay disappears. So now here, I don't want it showing anymore as I make my changes. So I'm going to hit Y, that'll turn it off. I'm going to make this brighter. And before I make it too bright, I'm going to go down to my effects here and actually take down the dehaze. And what that's going to do is it's going to add almost like a fog layer to my background. And here, I think I may want to actually bring this down just a little bit to about there. And also maybe just bring this down a little bit to about there. Which I think I actually want to make even lighter, so probably about there. And I think I also want to make it a little bit warmer. So I'm going to pump up the temperature just a little bit to about there. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to make her a little bit brighter, especially where the light is hitting her. Right now she looks just too dark compared to this background. So I'm going to make a new mask, and we'll start with a select subject. Good, so we're just selecting her, and I don't want to really brighten up any of the bottom part of her. I just want to brighten up where the sun is hitting her right here. So I'm going to go ahead and intersect this with a radial gradient. And intersect basically means whatever you're selecting is going to intersect with the selection below. So if you intersect two circles, you'll get kind of an oval shape. Okay, so we're going to go here, and I'm going to start about here and just kind of go in this highlight area. Now, to turn on and off the handles for my various gradients and overlays, I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, and that's going to turn on my little handle there. I can hit V to turn it back off, and I can hit Y to turn off the whole overlay. And here I want to start increasing my exposure and also increasing my whites. And I think also just increasing the temperature so our skin doesn't look so cool. And then maybe I'll also increase the highlights. I just want to get those lights to be not darker than these lights here. And I think that looks pretty good. I might just move this down a tiny bit. So let me hit V again. Go down to about there. Just want to hitting the top of those legs right there. Might just decrease the feather a bit too, to there. Okay, and we'll call this mask model correction. Okay, and then I want to do another mask, and for this one I want to change the color of her pants. I'm primarily doing this just to show the different ways that you can create masks. But for this example, let's say we wanted to change these pants to kind of a green color. So first, because the pants are entirely contained within the model, I can do a select subject first. That's going to get me quite a bit of the way there. Next, I want to intersect this with a color range. So I'm going to select color range, and you'll see I now have the eyedropper. If I click and drag, I want to make sure I'm just containing my dark to light blue colors there. So something like this. And then I can hold shift, do another one right in this area, maybe one more here. So I've pretty much done that. Next, here I actually want to see what the mask looks like. I can see a little preview of it here, but if I go here to these three dots, I can do white on black and look just at it like this. Okay, so next I want to subtract, and we're going to do a color range here. I'm going to try to subtract the skin tone colors there, so like that. And finally, we can also do another subtract, and here we'll just use a brush, and I'm going to paint out the top part here that I don't need in my pants mask. Something like this. Make this brush smaller. Here you can see how I've layered up quite a lot of tools to make this one mask. So here we're using two color range selectors and a brush and a subject just to select these pants here. And if I wanted to, I could also do an add brush, zoom in here, kind of make sure that I'm also selecting this part even stronger, so something like this. Okay. Okay, so let's hit V, let's hit Y, and let's go down to our hue. And let's move this toward green. And I'm also going to use this. And there you can see this is our pants. You can see we're using that to change the color of the pants. Okay, and then the other one I want to do here is one more radial gradient, and this will just act as a vignette to the whole image. Let's go like this, and I'm going to change this back to my color overlay. Let me increase the feather here, something like this. Hit V. And I want to invert this, so I'm going to do Option X. I'm going to take down the exposure. And because I'm targeting the shadow area here, I'm also going to make that shadow area a little bit cooler. And then another trick here is if, let's say I like this vignette mask, but I want to invert it and make the inside warmer. Well, rather than starting again, I can click here on the three dots and go duplicate and invert mask. And that'll clear the settings and make a duplicate of my mask that's inverted. So here, I may increase the temperature of this one. Do something like this. Okay, and then that finishes all my masks. The next thing I want to do is just some final corrections. I'm going to go back to my settings here, and basically everything under the basic panel and mask panel is going to happen underneath the rest of these corrections, which is why I'm doing them after my masks are done. So for curves, I'm just going to go to the blue curve, kind of bring up the bottom, get a little more blues into my shadows, and bring down the top just a tiny bit. And then I might go to my effects, just add a little bit of green and a tiny bit more vignetting. And if I hit the backslash, or sorry, forward slash, you can see there's the before and there's the after. All right, let's go back to File, Open. I'm going to open this Hillcrest Park 338. And this is a photo taken, same photo shoot, but a different model. And I want to make some pretty similar changes to it. And we're going to go through this a little bit faster because I've already shown you the basics of how it works, but just showing you a second image kind of give you a better idea of how we work with all these tools. So first, let's start with our basic panel. I'm going to adjust exposure first, just get this basically looking how I want it to look. So I'm going to increase the temperature a bit. For this one, I don't think I need to adjust the highlights so much. I might actually even want to bring them up a little and also bring up the whites a little bit. But I think that's pretty good where it is. Okay, so now before I dive into the masks, I want to make a few corrections. In this case, I want to get rid of this car and I also want to get rid of this trash can. So let's zoom in a little bit here. And with my heel tool, I'm going to just brush this part of the car and then drag this to somewhere that has kind of a similar shape. So maybe this part right here. And then for the other half of the car, we'll do something similar. Just drag this to maybe this spot right here. There you go. Good. All right, and then for the trash can, we'll draw that out. And we'll just move this to maybe there. Good. Okay, so that looks good. Next thing I want to do is add some atmosphere behind her. And to do that, we're going to dive into our masks. So because I want to select behind her, but I want her out of it, I could either start with a linear gradient of this background, so something like this. I'm going to change this back to the default behavior. So this is the affected area is going to show, just so that it looks more like what you're going to see on your end. Here you can see this is the area. The problem is I don't want her affected, so I'm going to subtract a select subject. You can kind of see how this works now is you can kind of layer up your various different types of masks to create an overall mask. So in this case, I now have my background selected. You will notice if I go here and go to white on black that this did have a little bit of an issue here in that it selected part of the background that it shouldn't have. So I want to subtract that as well. So I'm going to go here and just do a subtract brush. Oops. Sorry, I actually want to add that, not subtract it. So I'm going to change this to convert to add. And you can see that's now changing it to an add brush rather than a subtract brush. Okay, and then I'm going to subtract a brush as well and just get rid of this part of our shoulder that should not be in the selection. So one issue with the select subject, and this is true for select sky as well, is that there are no settings to adjust it. So whatever the AI does, you're kind of stuck with. You can use the brush tool to make some corrections, but you're pretty much stuck with whatever the AI tool does. So just realize that that limitation does exist, and you may have to go here white on black and check to see what selection was made by the computer. Okay, so there you go. I'm pretty happy with the mask itself. We can call this background fog. And to name it, I'm just double clicking on the name there and it's bringing up my rename. I can also go here and go rename. Okay, so I'm going to go down here, bring up the exposure a tiny bit, and then go down to effects and bring down the dehaze. So basically I'm adding haze as opposed to getting rid of it. I'm also going to go to my temperature and just add a little more yellow into the background. Now right now the overlay is kind of stuck on there. I'm going to turn that off. I can also do that with just hitting Y on the keyboard. And that I'm pretty happy with. So now with that background quite a bit lighter, I also want to make her face and the highlights on her a bit lighter. So I'm going to do a select subject, and I want to intersect this with a radial gradient. Just kind of select out her face area here. So something like this. Hit V to bring up my overlay. I'm going to go to about there. Maybe feather this some more. About there. I'm going to bring up the exposure on this. Actually, I'm going to bring up this exposure a tiny bit, but mostly bring up just the whites. Because I primarily want the highlights to be brighter. So something about there. And then also I'm going to add a little more warmth to her face. So something like this. Okay, pretty happy with that. The other thing I want to do is add an overall vignette. So let me just here do model correction. And then we're going to add one more. This will just be a radial gradient. And I'm going to kind of do it from where she's looking. So about there out to there. And I'm going to do Option X to invert my mask. And then just bring down the exposure there. I also like the shadows it's bringing to her face. So what I might do is go to my model correction here. Let me just name this one vignette. And I'm going to duplicate and invert this mask. So now it's selecting everything but that face area. The problem here is I actually still want this intersecting with this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my radial gradient and I'm going to convert this to a subtract. And I'm going to convert this, I'm going to get rid of the invert on that. So there you go, convert back to add. Let's see here. I basically just want to select the shadow areas of her. So something like that. And I'm kind of looking at this little preview. If that's too small for your mind to kind of wrap itself around, you can always do it this way as well. It's just a matter of what you're more comfortable working with. Okay, so there, and I just want to decrease the shadows here. It's primarily on her face that I want to do this. Just a little more contrast on her is going to give her a little more definition. So something like that. And then I think on this one I can go even brighter on the highlight there. There you go. Okay, and then the other thing I want to do here is on this vignette, I want to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the masking. The one other thing I might want to do is just bring a little more darkness and contrast to this area right here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a color range on this one. Just kind of select this grass. Now you'll notice that it's selecting way too much of the image. I can see it right away just with the red. For this, I'm going to switch to white on black. Just kind of use this to refine here. So I'm going to change my sampled color to something that's a little more just that. So there you go. I'm getting a much better selection of just my grass now. I'm going to subtract my subject, and I'm also going to subtract a linear gradient. And here I want to go back to my overlay, just kind of select all that background. So I'm just selecting this foreground green here. Under the color range here, I'm actually going to add a second color range just for that. So there you go. I've pretty much selected just this foreground grass. What I can do now is go down here. I'm going to adjust the temperature just a little bit to the left there, make it a little bit warmer. Also do the same here, kind of suck out some of that green. And I'm also going to build up the contrast just a little bit here. Okay, that's looking pretty nice. Next thing I want to do here is I'm happy with the mask. We'll call this grass correction. I'm going to go back to my editing panel or my editing tool here, go down to curves, and here I'm just going to go to my blue curve, bring up the bottom a little bit, bring down the top just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to go to my color grading, and in here in my highlights I want to add kind of a yellowy green to my highlights, so something like this, and then kind of a cyany blue, almost toward purple color in my shadows. It's kind of going to give it a dreamy fantasy kind of look, and if I don't like that I can always adjust it. And then finally I'm going to go to effects, add some grain to my image. I don't want so much grain that I'm losing the detail in her eyes. So I'm just adjusting the size until I'm getting nice grain, but it's not affecting the detail in her eyes. So something around there. And then might just give it a little bit of a vignette. And I'm pretty happy with that. I do /, you can see the before and the after. So there you have it. That's how you use the new mask features in Adobe Camera Raw, which is the same engine that Lightroom uses to develop photos. So if you understand how to use masks in Camera Raw, you understand how to use masks in Lightroom. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, leave a comment, share this video, turn on notifications. I do try to read all the comments, and as you can see with this video, I do try to respond and give you the tutorials that you want. So the more engaged you are, the more engaged I will be. Here are some other videos to check out. And I'll see you next time.